And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in all of human history. One thing is certain, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode 46 for Monday, March the 10th, 2025. My name is Jason Olborn. I form one part of this partnership, and I'm going to be joined right now by my news partner-in-chief, Nicola Charles. Welcome. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Jason. Happy Monday, listeners. And like everyone else at the weekend, I was waiting with bated breath to see the devastation of this cyclone in northern Queensland, I believe. And yeah, lots of people are posting that once again, this was government fear porn and overreach to validate the power that they hold. And Albanese was saying, we're going to take care of you and everything's going to be all right. Very strange situation up there, Jason. Very reminiscent of the pandemic. Panic, panic, panic. You're all going to die and we're going to save you. And didn't turn out to be quite what was expected, right?
Well, certainly it wasn't what we expected to see. There is, of course, lots of damage to beaches, lots of homes that are without power, but this is not unprecedented. But it certainly gave the politicians the excuse to never waste a crisis, or at least to set up so it has framed Anthony Albanese to come out and make climate change an election issue yet again. Here we go again. Meanwhile, Craig Kelly, who was on the show last week, has come out and shared information showing from the Guardian newspaper of all newspapers that the prevalence of cyclones has gone down, not up. The intensity's gone down, not up, and this was shared by The Guardian. I put it on my X page, which I shared as well, which I find astonishing that you can blame every storm now on climate change, and people just sort of join that bandwagon because they want to happy clap themselves into extinction, which is the theme of our show, isn't it? Just extraordinary. But Albanese's kidding himself. But at the same time, the polls this morning are suggesting that when asked, is Peter Dutton ready to govern, 55% say no. So it's one of those things, again, that good old credentialism is out there in full force. Doesn't matter if the first guy is garbage. The second guy, he's not qualified to deliver garbage. He's just not qualified. And so, around and around we go.
You're in trouble when you're not qualified to be as bad as Anthony Albanese. Interesting.
Extraordinary, isn't it, to think that Albo could actually win a second term in office?
Maybe that was the plan. Maybe this Dutton character is so shady and so hopeless and far too rich suspiciously that it's a plan. These people do have long plans, and we'll say, oh, no, there's something wrong with Dutton. Better we keep Albo. But, he's doing horrendous things for Australia that I personally think are unconstitutional. So, yeah, it's an interesting situation. It's a sad situation. I really do wish that we had a Trump figure in this country. If you don't like Trump, I know you won't like that comment, but someone worthy of something. And it seems in all of our countries, particularly in the Commonwealth, particularly in the Five Eyes nations, you're basically sifting through a bucket of slime looking for something good at the bottom of it, and there isn't much forthcoming, Jason.
Well, it's not that difficult, is it, when you consider that, for a hero to emerge, like a leader to emerge. Now, what we have noticed is that the consolidation with the joint ticket, which we spoke to in great detail last week with Craig Kelly and Gerard Rennick and Michael O'Neill of the Heart Party, that we have our first step. And I make the point, from little things, big things grow. And, there's nothing quite like an idea whose time has come. And so we are now seeing that there is a groundswell of support. I mean, the clip on my X page that gets no viewership, was over 50,000 or something. It's been shared hundreds of times. And what's interesting is the people that have come to follow me since that clip has come out. Some interesting people picked up an interview request on one particular show, and then even from the US, another particular show picked up an interview request to go over there. which I find that's interesting in itself that right people are seeing it, and that's what this is about. We are seeding new information, quality factual information, great debate and good discussion, and people want to talk to us about it. So I feel like our job. We're actually getting some momentum here, which you and I should be very proud of. I mean, it's one thing to build following, it's another thing to get people to continue to support and follow. But I feel like at long last that we're on the right side of Australian history. Now we might not have a Trump character. And I find it interesting that Clive Palmer is putting out some ads on YouTube where he's got Tucker Carlson talking about billionaires and how you sometimes need good billionaires. And Clive's using that to say that he's the good billionaire. And I just think it's astonishing. Clive, if you're a really good billionaire, you'd join the ticket and you'd work together and realize that people aren't going to come to you just because you say you've got all the money, because people are burnt and scarred, and people also don't want to be dependent, particularly on this side of the fence. We've learnt to be self-sufficient. And if that means dangling a whole lot of money saying, come to me, I'm going to make it happen, that's just doesn't make sense. So, like a lot of people have done without for a very long period of time and have learnt to live without. The problem is that they're living without so long that we forget that the reason that we're here on earth is not just to be part of the process, but everything that we do that can advance the cause is done in the moment. It's done by taking action. You can prepare, but at some point you've got to execute that preparation into action. And the only way that happens is by making moves in the right direction. And that's why I think that this whole idea of the joint ticket is great. I put up a little meme today that I made to look kind of like a political flag, but it's not. It's just purely support. And I called it Unity. And I call it the Unity ticket. And what
Oh,
I
you're
love
going to
about
be in trouble. You're going to be in trouble. You're not allowed to do that. Did you know that?
I'm just saying it's just unity. It's the idea of that this is the three guys, and it's called the Australia First Alliance. There it is, whatever you want to say. But the point is unity. And what I love about it is it's got the letters UN, and it's nothing to do with the United Nations.
Oh, that's
In
a
fact,
relief.
in fact, if anything, it's to do with independent nations. So
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
not a part.
What they'll do, Jason, is they'll charge you with subversion, even though that's what they're all guilty of. That's what's going to happen.
I'm going to get charged with subversion for writing Unity, the Australia First Alliance. Okay, well,
Now,
good luck.
I've got one thing to say about Clive Palmer. I did hear him because I'm friends with Sam Newman. I did hear him on Sam's podcast just prior to the weekend, Friday, I think. And he did say one thing I liked, but it wasn't anything to do with politics. He was saying, Sam was saying, people are struggling. And Clive did seem sympathetic to people struggling financially, even though he's a billionaire. And he said, "Oh, you've got lots of houses, and nothing affects you, and this, that, and the other." And Clive was saying, "Yeah, but none of that stuff means anything unless I've got what I need the most, which is being in bed with my wife and being able to talk to someone I love." And that moved me a little bit. So Clive's making a few noises that are correct, right? But at the same time, I climb into bed with a husband I love at night as well. But unfortunately, the conversations we're having about how tough things are financially. So it would be nice for people to not have to just constantly exist in a world where we are worried about money, where we are stressed about bills, where we basically can't see a future where we're building wealth or moving forward in any way, right? And that's what stresses people out. There are people out there who've got mortgages and car loans running at the same time. And, you're getting slowly crushed. You're getting further away from the finish line, right? Because everyone tries to get to the finish line when they have a loan. And I think that a lot of these banking laws have been breached. The fact that they are price gouging, right? They're making the most of this pandemic to steal from people. So anyway, that was one thing that Clive said. And you're talking about after our shows last week being contacted. I've been contacted by a US publishing company, their marketing arm, and they've asked me to write a book called Breach about the subversion of the Australian Constitution. So that's really interesting, right? That has really got my interest. And they said, "Oh, you seem uniquely qualified." Personally, I don't know that I am uniquely qualified, but I talk about it a bit. And so we'll talk about it a bit in our next show because there is some information that probably Australians should know. And same, I've been asked to go on some US podcasts as well, Jason. I'm actually going on with God, I've forgotten his name. Isn't that terrible? John Cullen. Yeah, I'm going on John Cullen's podcast to talk about everything that's going on as well. So this show has a lot of reach, is what I'm trying to say. Get to it. So I'm glad that you've been invited on stuff as well. And these are important conversations. And I was actually contacted as well by a Victorian police officer who said to me, I listened to the last show, Friday's show, and I first heard you talking to Craig Kelly, and I thought, oh, damn, you missed your opportunity, Nick, to like push him on, the Australia Act. And he said, and God damn it, you got there eventually, and you told him to bring down the Australia Act, and I take my hat off to you. So, as we say, Jason, we're having some uncomfortable conversations. We don't want this. We want to live in a country where we know the rule of law has been observed and that police officers are sworn into the Commonwealth, which means, they're sworn in to uphold the law, protect the people. When we're dealing with police officers who've sworn an oath to the state, well, they don't have jurisdiction over us. So the fact that police officers and people like that are contacting us, Jason, makes me think that this job, this venture, this new business that you and I have undertaken is a good one, and it makes me want to continue on with it.
Oh, it's fantastic. I'm glad that you are as positive as I am. And the fact is that we live in separate states, we have separate lives, and this is a professional endeavour that we do. And one of the things that's really important in this process, now I'm going to put it out there, and I want you to fight me on this. Here's where here's where I'm going. In order for us to be taken seriously in this space, we have to become professional. Now, that means that we have to be able to derive an income from the work that we're doing. Now, there'll be many people, and I've read their criticisms in the past, saying that the information should be free. And that's true. Like you pick up a newspaper or you can look at a website and you can get information that is free. But the thing is, that business model relies on advertising. Now, this business model can't rely on advertising because we don't have the reach of these other. We
won't accept it either. We won't accept it. Yeah.
And we will be very picky. So we're not going to take ever a donation from a big pharma company or something that we don't believe in. So how is it that we can become professional to make it sustaining? Because when you think of it, two things happen. If you're considered professional, therefore you can present equally against the professional journalist in the mainstream. So you would be invited onto that program on the ABC, or you would be invited onto Sky News, or you would be invited onto A Current Affair to debate, or when they have those shows where you have three commentators in the morning on Sunrise or Today Show, and they come on and talk about these asinine subjects, and it's like, are you serious? Those guys that get on those little panels for 5 minutes, they get paid an appearance fee to go on to mainstream news. They don't just do it out of the goodness of their own heart. And they turn up, they're on contracts, and they earn a good income from just doing that, more than we would expect to earn from doing this show full time. So these people are sort of ranked and have sort of standing in the community. Most people don't know who they are. So it's all an inside type of situation, and they know what you're going to expect, and they're always going to come out in the same direction. So there it is. So that's the first component of it. So in order to do that, we have to come up with a business model that's going to work. Now, what doesn't work are donations. Straight out, if you ask people for donations, somewhere between 1% and 5% will donate to what you're doing. And at the end of the day, it's never enough to sustain. Advertising doesn't work because you don't have a big enough audience and you're going to be very picky. Sponsorship, perhaps that's one way of doing it, but you've got to be able to give something back for it that's going to count. The other options may well be that you take subscription, but then again, the same problem. So it becomes a value or to and fro. So what I'm trying to say is I'm putting it out there to let you know that in order for this show to advance, and if we become professional, it means we can invest more money, we can bring in new staff, we can put on new shows, we can actually have producers that get paid to work with us. And some producers' roles are just to go and get interview subjects from around the world. Now, when I did Charles Ortel, that was me doing it. That's 3 years worth of work to get Charles to come onto the show by making various different approaches before he finally realised what was going on. And would you believe it? He loved the show that much that he now follows my page and he's sharing stuff with me all the time. 3 years it took. So obviously we're qualified to do what we're doing, but we have to be recognised in doing what we're doing. And that was the advantage of both of us having the experience on TNT, Nicola, your experience on other radio down there in Victoria. And so it is that when you're playing in this space, there is so much more to it. So I've been approached by someone in America who wants to introduce me onto his platform. He's building a fabulous website, has great support and whatever. So that is interesting. So things are moving. And like the political parties, I believe what's going to happen with the independent media is there's going to be a consolidation around a certain type of brand new business model that's going to leave people going, oh my God, these people have really worked it out. I'm not going to say much more than that on air at the moment. There are things behind the scenes that I'm excited about that could just work. Maybe they're all going to fall to pieces, but be confident that what we're doing is for a long-term commitment to being able to take on the news for what it is, report the facts, and get away from the propaganda model that's held us down for so long.
Yeah, well, you said people can come at me for that comment. I'll be the first one. I would argue that we are already a professional outfit. I think we're two professional radio hosts who decided to do this endeavor together. The only problem is we are unfunded professionals. So that I understand what you're saying completely, but we'll get there. We'll work it out. You know, there's a lot of interest from a lot of people, and I do think that some of these business models will occur. We're getting listened to. That's the most important thing. Perhaps we need like Tucker Carlson's business advice. But you're absolutely right, because I know jointly we do know someone who we would love to be able to just give him a living wage to work for us, to organise these interviews. That would be fantastic. So I'm sure the listeners will want us to get there. And I always say when you go on and watch your sort of online news and I just don't want to be one of those people who's saying, here's my friends at this gold company and I want you to invest in gold. And, it really sort of grates on me. So if we lived in a fair and reasonable world, we would be funded. I mean, Australia is owned by one of the biggest media organizations, most of the media in Australia and in America, Fox News, by the Murdoch organization. And obviously now they're working against Australians because they're not interested remotely in funding independent media. And I think that's a real shame because Australia actually does have a really good provenance with establishing media. And so it's deliberate. There's an awful lot of shadow banning going on. I've been reasonably disappointed with X of late, particularly with regard to you, but it's starting to happen to me as well. And, there's this thing, isn't there, that we're out there fighting for freedom of speech. And Craig Kelly says, let's enshrine freedom of speech. And I'm all for that, as long as we're enshrining it in the right constitution. But here's the thing. You can enshrine, let's say we're at the other side of this. Let's say you've enshrined freedom of speech. Let's say that you and I end up on a business model or a platform where we get an income for the shows that we do somehow. And that's great. And that means we can, we could do 2 or 3 hours a day of this show if that was the case, if we weren't having to run around and do, regular jobs. And let's say we're at the other side of that. When you've got that freedom of speech enshrined, do you know what that doesn't stop? It doesn't stop little fingers of AI, the little tentacles, or the CEO of a major social media platform still affecting your freedom of reach. So I think it's really important because governments are trying, the Australian government is actively trying to, via the e-safety commissioner, fine social media platforms if they don't take certain people out and shadow ban them or deplatform them. And that's because, they're operating this, well, you can have freedom of speech, but you can't have freedom of reach. So as well as enshrining the speech part, we must also enshrine the reach part, because this is the side of the new digital world, the new world order, online, AI, that can even ignore something as enshrined as freedom of speech. Because what that means is you can run down the road going, I hate Albanese and he's crap and I'm never going to vote for him again. But you can't say it online. Well, you can, but no one will hear you. No one will see you. No one will know. And so there are things running parallel here that need to be focused on. And as I said, primarily, we've got absolutely no protections, no legislations, no laws to protect us from those who would do us harm with regard to AI and online speech. So that's something we need to think about as well, Jason.
Absolutely, we do. Well, we are already a third of the way through the show. You know what that means? Got to get into those headlines. And it's a big bulletin for you this Monday, March 10. Southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales continue to be hit by rain and flooding brought by the ex-tropical cyclone Alfred, with flood warnings still in place for large parts of the east coast, with over 200,000 homes and businesses now being left without power. Hundreds of schools across New South Wales and Queensland will be closed Monday. About 1,800 people remain cut off from evacuation due to the flooding in New South Wales, the SES also said Monday morning. Now, 11,000 businesses have closed in the past year in Australia, with the latest Genius Child Early Learning Childcare Centre based in Pyrmont being left with just 85 cents in the bank as wages remain outstanding. The ATO is owed $50 billion in taxes, largely due to deferring tax liabilities to businesses during COVID. Construction, hospitality and retail are the main businesses affected. Murdoch Media is trying on another hit piece against President Trump, this time delivering news that we should all celebrate. Freelance journalist Jamie Seidel has written that Elon Musk has hinted the US president is talking about leaving the United Nations. How about that one? I can hear the cheers already. Meanwhile, in the two-pronged hit piece attack, Daniela Elsa has written that King Charles has managed to smear egg on the face of President Trump by meeting and shaking hands with expired President Zelensky. In the words of Rafael Latasta, okay then. In less than a week, social media has been abuzz with left-wing politicians and media pundits declaring the following: Zelensky is the leader of the free world, Emmanuel Macron is the leader of the free world, and Justin Trudeau, who will stand down shortly, possibly as early as this evening, is the greatest Prime Minister Canada ever had. Goodness me. Hunter Biden has withdrawn his lawsuit against Trump advisor Garrett Ziegler, who published the contents of Hunter's laptop. While America's corrupt and lying intelligence officials claimed the contents of the laptop were a Russian fabrication, Hunter himself accused Ziegler of accessing, tampering with, manipulating and altering the contents of his computer. I suppose he put in those AI photos of Hunter Biden. According to his attorneys, Hunter can no longer afford to pursue the legal action after he was rendered homeless when his two $4 million Malibu rental properties were destroyed in the recent fire. Plaintiff has suffered a significant downturn in his income and has significant debt in the millions of dollars range, they wrote in a recent filing. Apparently, Hunter's book and artwork are no longer selling, and his father no longer has the access he once did. Robert Redfield, the former director of the CDC, defines the term controlled opposition. After explaining last week that long COVID was mRNA vaccine injury, he's now running interference on the origins of COVID and the plot to create a vaccine for Chinese people, including its military, using a recyclable vaccine vector not requiring needles. Seriously, this man appears to be playing for his life and obfuscating with his own conspiracy theories to protect those around him, likely because he has been threatened for what he has previously said, which would now make him an unreliable witness. It's always about them. Two men have been arrested by Inglewood Police Department in California and Los Angeles for allegedly shooting and killing a man who tried to stop them from stealing his neighbour's catalytic converter. Are both illegal aliens with extensive criminal histories, with each other having over a dozen arrests in LA County in recent years. Meanwhile, LA City Council member Nithya Raman is more interested in suing Toyota for making their catalytic converters super easy to remove instead of going after the catalytic converter thieves executing innocent people in the streets. Meanwhile, US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said global tariffs are going to come down and we're going to grow the economy in a way you've never seen grown before. You are going to see in the next 2 years the greatest set of economic growth coming for the US. Meanwhile, US President Trump's executive order to establish a Bitcoin strategic reserve and stockpile of other digital assets has failed to impress crypto markets, with Bitcoin's value plummeting 6% following the announcement. Bitcoin, as I just said, 6% down following the order on Thursday, which did not include plans for the government to actively buy Bitcoin. So I'll make this point: define Ponzi scheme. Meanwhile, however, in a statement announcing the order, Trump's crypto czar David Sachs said the strategic Bitcoin reserve and digital asset stockpile would be capitalized with assets forfeited in criminal or civil proceedings. This means it will not cost the taxpayer a dime, Sachs said on X. The US owns an estimated 200,000 Bitcoin seized during criminal and civil forfeiture. That would be worth about 17.5 billion US dollars at this stage. Sachs suggested the reserve would function like a digital Fort Knox by helping Bitcoin retain its value. After the Romanian authorities cancelled the first round of elections, won by anti-globalist Călin Georgescu, and detained him for questioning a bogus prosecution, it now arises that Georgescu has been barred from running in the May poll, which he is the leading candidate favourite with 40% of vote support. Bucharest has exploded in chaos after the decision was announced. Protesters have stormed fences, the Romania's Bureau of Electoral Control demanding answers as police move in to manage the turmoil. So with Georgescu polling over 40%, many are calling this blatant political interference. Anti-Tesla protesters in the US have turned violent as criticism of the chief executive Elon Musk gathers speed. Hundreds of people upset by Elon Musk's role in US politics, particularly in Doge, that has cut public sector jobs and highlighted fraud, gathered at Tesla dealerships across the US as part of a Tesla takedown movement. And police in Tigard, a town near Portland, Oregon, said a Tesla dealership was damaged by gunfire on Thursday. And over 1,000 people have been killed in 2 days of ethnic cleansing by Syria's new Islamist rulers in the country's coastal region of Latakia, Reuters has reported. Nicola.
We won't be defending freedom there, I fear. Okay, couple of little things and then a couple of biggish things. So firstly, go and watch a movie if you've got real television. I don't, but I was invited to a friend's house last week for pizza. They have a lovely pizza maker, and to watch the movie BitCon. You've got to watch this movie called BitCon. It is phenomenal, and it just shows how, well, unstable this stuff is. When it comes to the theft of catalytic converters, and indeed any theft, particularly in California, I lived there for 7 years, you never, and you understand the rule is you never, ever prevent a theft, not even if you are working in a bank. Not even if they're holding a water pistol and they tell you to put your hands up and give them the money, you do it. You never, ever prevent a theft, particularly in California. By the way, Australia is also seeing a spate of thefts of catalytic converters. And with regard to Tesla, before I get onto Hunter Biden, Tesla's an interesting one because I've thought for a long time, Jason, how very clever, how very shrewd it was that a conservative like Elon Musk created this vehicle, the Tesla, which seems to be a really good vehicle if you want electric, and then somehow got every single left-leaning Hollywood Democrat and left-leaning people across the world to buy these vehicles from a conservative manufacturer. I think that was one of the smartest and shrewdest things he's ever done. It still doesn't make any sense in my head. But you're sitting here on this show telling me that Hunter Biden is screaming poverty and that he's broke when the big guy, Big Daddy-O Biden, has literally stolen billions from the United States of America. You've got to be having a laugh, surely.
Oh, it's superb. It's just poetry in motion. I can't believe how fantastic that story really is. That I think I mentioned maybe a week ago that Hunter Biden was in an agreement with London Roberts, the mother of his child that the Biden family refuses to acknowledge. In the alimony settlement, he was meant to give her one painting a month as part of that because they were valuable. Well, now they're not worth anything and they can't be sold, and we all know why.
She should have gone for the cash. A painting, come on.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? That she would have probably been stood over one way or another to accept that. I mean, there is money being paid as well, but it was vastly reduced from the demands that she was asking for. But it just shows you that the con is on in the Biden family. They really are something else. And of course, after having done the interview with Charles Ortel, who was able to explain, Clinton Foundation corruption. He pointed to Obama corruption, Biden corruption. It's not limited to any other Bush corruption, of course. Now, remembering that Charles Ortel himself was a Republican, he's now an independent, and people do that in the United States, is that they sort of publicly, semi-publicly swear their allegiance, they whether they're Republican, Democrat, or independent. And I found it interesting that he walked away clearly from establishment politics and didn't go one way or another, but just said, "Look, I'm an independent," and that's fascinating because he found corruption on both sides of the fence, and that's what we're talking about here. This is the great confusion with left, right politics. I saw someone the other day on X said something about how Democrats and Labor were much better because they did things for the poor people. And then someone pointed out some corruption, and then he came back and said, well, at least this. And I said, mate, the fact that you just had to say at least means that you're acknowledging that they're also corrupt. Can we just agree that both sides are corrupt and we can move on? And that's the point. It's like, stop sticking to these people. Get out of that situation. But then again, I am preaching to the converted, because anyone listening to this show, there'd be very few people that are going to vote Labor or Liberal. We're all third party people one way or another, or at least we realise what we don't like. The hardest thing is when you go to the polls, if you're disappointed with everyone, and say your local third party candidate has pissed you off because they've said something, and then you protest against them by crawling the vote against them. Well, I'm not going to vote for that guy because he said something to me. But then you're just giving the vote to someone who's even worse. So that's why I keep saying this idea of politics being about idealism is a redundant term. It's about pragmatism, and it's about negotiation, and it is about doing deals, and it is a blood sport. But what you've got to do is you've got to be able to create some form of momentum and genuine alternative. But just thinking that some guy is going to save you, that's going to be the great savior, it just can't work. I mean, the closest we've ever seen to all of that is, of course, the whole Trump movement, because it's been totally anti-establishment. But he's being white-anted every day by people that were once supporters, and they're criticising Pam Bondi, they're criticising RFK Jr. Someone came out the other day and said, see, RFK Jr. is a fraud because he's talking about MMR vaccines in Texas. Hang on a second. They just came out over the weekend and announced that they're going to do a study into vaccine and autism out of the CDC. Like, they're going to go and hit it. So you have to play both sides of the fence. You can't just come out with an idealist point of view. And that's the thing. It's only ever going to get you 10% support. That is a fact. Trump came out on the weekend and said it again. He said, I don't understand why the Democrats are so focused on this trans issue. It's a 90-10 subject at best. It's really a 95-5. It's a 99-1 subject. It doesn't make sense that they would isolate themselves on this particular issue. That it's just, people just aren't concerned about it, but there are negatives that they are concerned about. So this is the thing. It's about playing through the middle. It's tough, but at some point it does come down to the, better the devil you know in this current scenario, but we are playing for something much bigger than that. We're playing in an empire, a global Western empire that's teetering on collapse, buckling under total corruption, and the truth is coming out. And nothing could explain it more than the words I read last week from Clandestine, explaining the whole Ukraine war and the setup over there, that it is the US manipulating the scenario to attack Russia, forcing the provocation, and using Ukraine human beings to be the cannon fodder whilst feeding them weapons and money, etc. No wonder Ukrainians are being rounded up and don't want to fight, because they know that it's a hiding to nothing in a war that can't be won, and they are being the people in the middle that are being cruelled. And I can't understand how a Democrat who can be so pro Bernie Sanders and so anti-war, and they come out and they're pro-war. And this is another thing I came up with the other day. It's the idea that lefties, for some reason, want to have two positions on every issue. If that makes sense. This is what I wrote. Democrats and lefties always reserve the right to hold two positions on every issue so that they can always be right on any given day. But really, it is because they are contrarians with no moral compass, no nuance, no perspective, and zero ability to determine who is genuine and who is using them for their own means. As a result, they're always wrong, because they trust the greatest criminal organisation in history that is actively working against them, making them hate themselves, their country, and their lives, and they become professional whiners and permanent victims. It's so sad.
Well, I need to compartmentalize all that a little bit. So away from the Russia-Ukraine war, which I feel I know why that's occurring in this. America is split. But I think with the RFK thing, the reason there's frustration, and I am sympathetic to that, is we fully expected, after supporting the people globally, RFK and everything he was doing and saying, and of course he was doing and saying it on all the biggest podcasts around the world, that, vaccine injuries and harms, and I've been to court and I've sued these pharmaceutical companies before. What we wanted, we were waiting like a new puppy for a treat. We wanted him to come out and say, children don't need to be vaccinated. These things have not been researched properly. And he talked long and hard about speaking to Fauci. And when he wrote the book saying to him, name me just one of the 72 childhood vaccines that you actually did research on. And in the end, Fauci was forced by the court to admit, well, actually, we haven't done research on any of them. And so everyone expected RFK to come out and wipe the slate clean, and he hasn't necessarily done that. And so what's confusing about that is that the Democrats, the left in America, were so big on calling everyone anti-vaxxers and granny killers that now they sort of can't go after RFK, and I don't know if that's part of it, because he's not saying that he's anti-vaccine. So he is in some ways playing to the left a little bit. So I just want clarification from him. When you've gone to the lengths of writing a book called The Real Anthony Fauci, and when you've gone to the lengths of, talking at length about these vaccine harms and that there's no research, I think we all wanted him to come out stronger. Now, with relation to Pam Bondi and the Epstein list, which now bits of information, she's saying, oh, the FBI are going through it. Talk about putting the fox in charge of the hen house. We don't trust the three-letter agencies. So why is the FBI going through the Epstein list? It's obvious she's saying it's to redact victims' names, and we don't believe that. And I think our suspicions are founded, because I was sent information over the weekend that I can't confirm, but that not only is there a British prince on that list as a customer, and I think we all know who that prince is, Andrew, but there's also the wife, the young wife, the new wife of another British prince who was not a customer, but was involved in those parties. Now, I'm not going to name this wife of a young British prince, because her and her husband are incredibly litigious, but apparently there is information relating to that wife, and that's why it's being held up. Now, if I like to zoom out, if you zoom out and look at the bigger picture of that, zoom out, look at the bigger picture, and look at how involved in this despicable, disgusting, illegal, nefarious operation being led by Jeffrey Epstein, members of the British royal family, the monarchy, are involved in. It's extremely, extremely concerning. So much so that I'm actually about to interview an American pastor. I've watched his stuff at length and I find it absolutely fascinating. So he's going to be coming on the White Rabbit podcast, because he's found out something absolutely extraordinary about King Charles III. So I'll be interviewing him, and perhaps we can put a clip of that on this radio show as well. But it would seem that the monarchy is very involved in this, and that could also be why, prior to being confirmed, someone like Pam Bondi is saying, oh, I'm going to get the list. I don't know why we haven't had the list. I'm going to release the list. This is in the public interest, and rah, rah, rah. Then you find yourself in a situation where you're confirmed. Now, I also interviewed on my podcast a woman. She's in her 80s now. She's South African. She joined the Navy in South Africa, and as soon as she got onto the boat in South Africa, she found out that not only was she the only woman on a boat, which is a very bad idea, but that all the men on that boat were neo-Nazis. And she was told if she didn't become a neo-Nazi, that, terrible things were going to happen to her. And you can imagine, as the only woman on a boat. So she was forced to become one. And so I interviewed her about that. One of the interesting things she said to me was not so much about joining that crazy organization, was that she said that she heard audio and saw videos in relation to South Africa, where as soon as these politicians become elected, so think about Pam Bondi and RFK, they are very ideological when they're running, as I would be if I were still running for the Senate. I was very ideological as well, and let's get back to the Constitution and fight for Australians. And you're very ideological at the moment that you're elected. And she said to me something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. She said, when they become elected, they are taken into a room and a literal gun is held to their head, and it is explained to them exactly who they actually work for. And in that moment, all of their ideology is demolished, because nothing about the systems of politics and the body politic is what any of these ideologues imagined it would be. And everything that we've just gone through, when I interview this pastor from America who's done research on this based on crests and shields and historic content, including biblical, talking about everything we've been through being the responsibility of King Charles III and that it was begun when he was Prince Charles, you realize that we're all kidding ourselves if we believe that these politicians are actually going to come in and even be able or even retain their ideology once they get there. And so obviously these are interviews with people. I didn't experience these things for myself, but there have been major changes in people's attitudes. For instance, Dan Andrews, right? He was Labour. He was a lefty. He was an ideologue. And apparently some of the things he was saying and the noises he was making early on were good. And I can't believe I'm saying that about Dan Andrews. Then what happened? We saw the advent of a pandemic. And somebody, because I don't believe the public side of this story, somebody pushed Daniel Andrews downstairs and broke his back. They got him to a party where he could hobnob around as a politician. That was a trap. That was entrapment. They pushed him down the stairs to show him who he was really working for, because apparently he was pushing back on some of the lockdown measures in Victoria. What happened after he spent 8 months out on his lying down to heal a broken back? He came back and he was a different politician, Jason, and we became the most locked down city in the world. A lot of these people end up under duress, and what we need to discover, Jason, is the duress of who?
Of course, we absolutely have to find out who's pushing that. Now, what I don't understand about that argument is that how every single politician, if said gun is put to their head, how some of them don't immediately resign and they can cite
Threat to family. Threat to family.
So, but they could simply say that they've been diagnosed with a disease that's going to stop them. They could come up with an excuse to at least send off a signal that they're not playing, and yet they don't do it. So it is horrific. Now, a couple of points to make. RFK Jr. is currently dealing with the very convenient or inconvenient outbreak of measles in Texas that's getting people all worked up in a particular area where there is a.
Well, you need to catch measles to get immunity, so just go through it.
That's right, with a large community of unvaccinated, again, with MMR, right? So there's that component. Now, there are good reasons that people would not want to get vaccinated with MMR, despite the masses being told the opposite. It says
well, it's a body rash versus brain damage. It's as simple as that. A body rash and a temperature versus brain damage.
So then they announced that there have been some people who have died. Now, we've covered that on the story, and it showed that people were sick with some other sicknesses, and then they were given an MMR, and then they shed measles, and then they called it a measles death. So that's inaccurate, but that's a form of scientific fraud being played out. The other component is that some children may or may not be malnourished, and it's also said that if you're up on your vitamins A and C, etc., and there would be others, that you would be able to resist again. And as you say, it is a rash. It's interesting that people are sharing the old Brady Bunch episode that had been wiped off social media. That one particular one where the kids all get the measles and they have a joke about having to get a few days off school and they get to stay home, etc. And while they get their rashes, and that was basically the end of that story. So it's interesting how far we've gone down a pathway. So given that, what RFK Jr. has said, he says that parents must have a choice to either give the vaccine or not give the vaccine. So that is a big change from anyone else in any other world or any other country in the world that has said you must take your vaccine, and then they have no jab, no play like they do in Australia. Kennedy, as the head of the HHS, is saying you must have a choice. Now, he also said he was pro-safe vaccines, which is a distance from being anti-vaccine. So what has he come out and done? Ordered the CDC is going to do this study. Hopefully it won't be corrupted, and we'll look into that as it plays out. We've still got Jay Bhattacharya to get in, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is that there is immediately what you're saying is that these things haven't been properly tested. Well, he's saying, well, let's properly test it and let's properly be transparent. So what is he doing? Playing both sides of the fence the best he can now that he's a politician. as secretary of the HHS, and that's where we are now. On the Pam Bondi side, it is difficult because people are impatient. They're wondering what's going on. Pam Bondi did oversee a number of human trafficking convictions and cases, etc., when she's the Attorney General of Florida between 2011 and 2019. But of course, criticised that she didn't do enough. Well, no one has done enough on human trafficking, and that's because it's the hottest political subject in the world. There isn't anything hotter than that. We also know that the Polk County Sheriff in 2022 made massive arrests coming out of Disney World and other places where human trafficking took place in Florida. Bondi, of course, wasn't the Attorney General at that stage. So the Epstein story, I thought, should I say, back in when it first sort of started to rear its head and Pizzagate, sort of 2017, etc., I thought there was going to be hundreds of these stories, that Epstein was just one of them. And I couldn't understand why they couldn't get to the bottom of it. But fast forward 8 years, and it seems to be the only story. Diddy's a sort of a half story in it. We've seen some horrific behaviour of so many people being arrested. We saw the Bill Cosby stories and that behaviour that came and went, and he eventually was released from jail, like it seems that everyone is. Interestingly, Tucker Carlson last week interviewed Sam Bankman-Fried from Binance, which I thought was interesting. He's inside for 25 years for securities fraud and other deals in that whole crypto collapse. But what's interesting is that he's in prison with Diddy, and they were talking about what it was like to be in prison with Diddy in an interview. Can you imagine Tucker Carlson just interviewing a prisoner in for 25 years, and they're talking about what it's like inside? And so there's just another character, and it's just interesting that we're getting access to these people today in places that you would never think. How is it that you just interview people in a prison just over the internet? I mean, what's actually going on in there? But patience is a virtue, and all of us are impatient because this thing has been going on forever and ever and ever. But if you are talking about the King of England, who I was critical of on Friday because I said he doesn't even stand under the Union Jack anymore. He's wishing people a happy Ramadan. He's going to World Economic Forum meetings. That means he's not even proud of the British Empire, of who he is the ruler of, and he literally wants to collapse it. So that's what I'm saying. Why would we want to serve that system when it's being white-handed by the guy in charge? Like, you can't get a bigger traitor.
Yes, but what we're going to look at on tomorrow's show is that, being a Commonwealth and under common law and the protections of the real Constitution gives us, it doesn't mean you're under the rule of King Charles. That's the thing. We have effectively distanced ourselves from him, because when King Charles came here, remember that recent visit, he actually handed Anthony Albanese and the Labour Party, which is very concerning, an official seal. So instead of waiting for a royal seal to pass things, Albanese has this seal and he can push things through. They've sold off the Land Titles Office, and very little is to do with the monarchy anymore. So I understand what you're saying. I don't want anything to do with the monarchy either. But it's all embroiled, you see, because what we're looking at is so many things that look separate. So we've got the pandemic, the engineered pandemic. It was fake. Sorry to tell you all. You've got the engineered and fake climate disaster, the climate catastrophe. You've got the financial collapse. That's the root of it. That's the reason for it all. And then you've got this Epstein stuff and Trump and Russia and Ukraine. Now, all of this stuff, in the end, it's like a funnel putting oil in your car. In the end, we're going to funnel it down and realize that all this is connected, including Israel and Palestine. All of it is absolutely connected. The person I'm going to interview, this pastor, also talks about Israel and Palestine. He's Jewish originally, but he's a Christian pastor, but very, very interesting guy, very interesting take. But what we're going to learn is, I think this is a large group of powerful people who've not only stolen from us and committed banking fraud, financial crime, crimes against humanity, mass murder, as it turns out, that crime of lying to the people, treason, essentially. Does treason still exist? We've seen a whole bunch of that, all to benefit themselves or the people that finance them. and it's all connected. And now possibly we've got this group of reasonably honest and true and for the people bureaucrats, we hope, the Trumps, the RFKs, the Pam Bondis. We don't seem to have any in our nations, which is a bit disappointing. I mean, there's not one person we can look to and go, they're a real champion. Well, maybe Rennick. And then you've got, which of course they couldn't do it without any of this. You've got the Murdoch media, who seems to be going up against Trump. And he's saying that he is against Trump as a media organization, right? And how shameful is that? Because what he's actually saying is, if you're saying you're against Trump, you're saying you're A, against all conservatives. That's what that comment means. And that B, you're against the people. So the people that made you a powerful media organization, and probably still do by buying your rags, your information with adverts on for dildos and pharmaceuticals, you're working against the people who've made you extremely rich. And then what does someone like Murdoch do with his money? Well, he funds his nephew, Matt Handbury, to start a company funded by Rupert Murdoch called Australian Rain. And you can find this company at australianrain.com.au. Look it up now, australianrain.com.au. And these are cloud seeding, weather manipulating, weather engineering companies that make it rain. They never seem to make it rain in Australia when there's a bushfire, though. No, that can all burn. No worries there. We won't make it rain that day. But they've done 8 years research in Oman, and they know how to make it rain, and they're getting government contracts. So what you've got there is the Murdoch media saying they're anti-Trump, which is anti-conservative, which is anti the people. You've also got the Murdoch media saying we're in the middle of a climate catastrophe and it's all our fault and we need to pay carbon credit taxes, while at the same time paying his nephew to do what? Change the damn climate, because it's not happening naturally, because it must be engineered. So this whole thing is a fraud, Jason, and it must be brought down.
Yep. Of course, everything needs to. The question is, of course, how it's going to happen.
We've got a clean house. Think of a way, Jason. You're a smart guy.
Well, I've been listening and watching and seeing what's going on. And look, in Australian politics, the one person who's been arguing that more than anyone was what do they call Australia One, Ricardo Bosi. His support was never very much, and now it's completely annihilated. I don't even know if his most ardent supporters are following him there. So will it be radical or will it be systemic?
Systemic is my feeling, yeah.
So, but this is why it's so interesting, because what we're seeing in the United States is a revolution,
Yes.
whereas everywhere else in the world it's still incremental. But what's magic about it is that the shifting sands, if you will, are certainly now they're now in motion. So things are changing. You've got Jackie Lambie coming out today on the Today Show, the senator from Tasmania, telling Karl Stefanovic that Anthony Albanese should boot American intelligence and military personnel out of the country to send a clear message to Donald Trump that we're not going to put up with his nonsense over potential tariffs.
Oh, so they've built all these massive military bases. They've done exercises here, and now we're going to boot them out. That is the most bipolar response I've ever heard. Look, I question these bases as well. Most of them are in the north of Australia, which faces what? China. So you're telling me we've already got Chinese warships sailing up and down, coming all the way down to New South Wales, I believe, down the eastern side of our country. One of them fired off a shot that was reported by a commercial airline pilot over the weekend. So you're telling me that your response is to go, we don't like the leader of the Republican Party who was democratically nominated and came to power via the will of the people. You're just going to rip those all out. And then what will we do if we have any more problems with China? They'll scream, oh, America, come and help us. Even the UK MPs in interviews are saying, we can't even go to Ukraine if America doesn't go with us. We don't have the equipment and we don't have the manpower. I mean, I understand what she's saying, but it's too bipolar. You can't suddenly do that. And my feeling, Jackie Lambie, and I don't often agree with what she says, my feeling, Jackie, is that you are safer with a military presence in Australia under Trump than you ever were under the corrupt Biden regime.
Well, this is the problem, isn't it? Because Jackie Lambie getting into office based on being an independent and being elected through the original UAP back in 2013,
She doesn't want
that
that for anyone else.
and then left that party. Well, she's gone the other way. If anything, Jackie's become so establishment based that your theory of being pulled inside to a room would hold water
Mm.
in the case of Jackie Lambie, because Karl Stefanovic then said, "Hang on a second, but what do you do when China sends even a fishing vessel down? We need America to back us." And then Lambie expressed doubt and saying that would Trump even honour its security pact in the event of war?
Of course it
So,
would.
so in other words, Jackie Lambie is now pro-China, anti-Trump's America, but pro-establishment America. This woman has absolutely got no idea what is going on. She should either join the Labor Party and admit who she
Sounds
is,
like she has.
exactly, or she should
Mm.
stand down and retire. Like that's seriously
She's
what she
become the
needs to do.
female Dan Andrews. Congratulations, Jackie, because you are a woman of the people. You're like me. You exhibit a lot of outrage, and we need that because I've had enough. And people listening to this show have had enough. We can talk about this stuff round and round all day. We need people like me. We need people like you, Jason. We need people like Jackie Lambie. We need people like Pauline Hanson, Craig Kelly, Gerard Rennick, Jordan Ruddock, Matt Canavan. We need these people who say, hang on, this doesn't make any sense. This isn't good for Australians. We need the outrage. But for God's sake, don't take the tools you've got and start doing Labour's bidding. We all know what's going on there, right? I'm anti-corruption. You say, Jason, people want this person or that person, and there's bad people on the left and bad people on the right. Yes, all you have to do is be anti-corruption. We're anti-corruption, and we have no anti-corruption watchdog. Because why? Because the people who would investigate, the police, are in on it because they are not sworn into the Commonwealth, which is the people. And this is why I didn't want a republic. When you swear these police into the Commonwealth, they're for, of, and by the people. They're there to protect you, to protect and serve. No, they're sworn into the state. I found this out at the end of 24 going into court. Some spurious accusation of pre-crime was thrown at me by a police lawyer. And I simply said, is the officer stating this a Commonwealth officer who has jurisdiction over me? Or is he an officer sworn into the state? And the magistrate, which is why nothing can happen without a jury as per the Constitution, the magistrate, a woman I could see was so uneducated on what I was saying. She goes, what do you mean exactly? This was the magistrate. She said the officer's sworn into the state. They're a state police officer. And I said, well, I'm a subject of the king and bound by the Constitution. And therefore, this officer bringing this spurious accusation has no jurisdiction over me. I was asked to appear again where they apologised. Very sheepishly, a more senior police lawyer said, so sorry, I believe I pronounced your name incorrectly. Everything's been dropped. Yeah, of course it's been dropped because you never had jurisdiction over me in the first place. So we don't have a Commonwealth police force. We don't have common law courts holding these politicians to account because somewhere along the line, I believe from the top down, and by the top, I mean the very top, the monarchy, they have weaponized our politicians and political parties against the people. Instead of being that thing we vote for to protect us and serve us and defend us, they've become that thing where they say, oh, I'll represent you, which means they give a lot of bloviating lip service to a lot of crap. They've basically become the people who get to stand there, like Scott Morrison, they used to call him Scotty from marketing. They've basically become the people who are very highly paid to be hated, to deliver the bad news that, guess what? We're doing the bidding of the king. We're not doing the bidding of you. And that's the same with the Governor General, the most senior politician, public servant in Australia. They do the bidding of the king. Something's gone wrong here. We've got a king that we may need to consider has committed treason against the people of the Commonwealth. That's how far up the tree this goes, Jason.
Yeah, well said. That is, it brings it to a head, doesn't it? This is how bad Charles is at this stage, and it's just become obvious. The question is how will that I suppose, be circumvented? How will it end? Well, it comes down to a people's movement. There will have to be a revolution at some stage, but it's interesting that people want to be deceived. They're comfortable living within comfort zone, and the only way that change is ever affected is by stepping outside said comfort zone.
It's not comfortable when at the end of paying your bills, mortgage, and car loan, you've got $150 that week to eat, Jason. People are paying their bills but starving. They're asset rich, well, they're not really because they haven't paid them off, but they've got no money. I've got a friend who's got a big house in Windsor down there in Pyrmont, and by the time she's paid her mortgage and bills, she doesn't have enough money to buy milk to make coffee in the morning. That's what the government have done to people. And this is a woman that works full time. That's what they've done to us. They can't be comfortable. They're not comfortable. They've been made as uncomfortable as I thought they'd be prepared to get, and they're still putting up with it. What is it going to take, Jason? What is it going to take?
Yeah, well, this is the $64 trillion question, if you will. What will it take for people to be able to make that difference? I don't know. I think I think people are waiting. Those that are watching, they're wanting to see this so-called first arrest. If that's going to change trajectory, who's it going to be? What will it be? This is the most important part of the term optics. Now, people can argue that, optics is just theatre. Well, the whole thing is theatre. Everything about politics is it's a show. And how do we know that? It's based on contribution of things that happen in the moment. And that's why the all-powerful office of the US president is such a way, because it's considered to be the most powerful political office on earth. But what's interesting is that those who are the enemies of Trump, which is clearly the establishment and all of their minions that think that Trump's the bad guy and it's been painted that way, are playing this game of optics that seems to be flowing around the world, and the anti-Musk movement. I mean, could you imagine that you have people that are protesting that the government doesn't get to waste enough of our taxpayer money when we go into an election squibbling over $5 a week decides it? Whoever offers you $5 a week decides the election, but when you expose that the government's been ripping you off for $4,000 a year, don't worry about it. Let's keep more of that. I mean, this is the ultimate paradox, isn't it? And this is why I said earlier that lefties seem to want to take two issues on every story so they can be right in any given moment. And one such example with Jackie Lambie with Pine Gap. I mean, Kim Beazley, quote, "We would be deaf and blind without Pine Gap." It's now been in operation for over 60 years. The facility outside Alice Springs is a remarkable element of Australia's alliance with the US. It is a US base, but it is the eyes and ears of signals intelligence from around the world that helps Australia. The former Labor Defence Minister, Kim Beazley, called this the Pine Gap paradox, the deep and unprecedented involvement in what the base does mean that Pine Gap becomes critical for us. It's now part of our intelligence and defence order of battle. Now, having said that, we are also at war with our own intelligence agencies, but at the end of the day, by cutting off your nose to spite your face because Jackie Lambie wants to send a message of she's going to stand up to Donald Trump and tariffs, she's kidding herself. She needs to go back to school and do some lessons in economics and work out where Australia's strengths are in terms of export. And you know what, Jackie? Maybe you should go out and start fighting for coal. And maybe we can start bringing in some money because we're selling it anyway to the enemy, which is China, is what Craig Kelly said on Friday. I mean, it's just ridiculous. At one stage, China's our enemy, but then we send them coal, but we don't send a coal to ourselves, so we rip ourselves up.
I say it all the time. I've been saying it for bloody years. They've got their warships doing maneuvers. Now, look, if that was sanctioned, and I'm assuming it was sanctioned, otherwise they wouldn't be there, right? We would hope that we would have submarines or even some American support to go around them and say, get out of our waters. I think the rule of thumb around Australia, because we're this giant floating rock, is that, and I'll tell you why I know this as well. I found it out sort of accidentally. The rule of thumb is that once you get to 2,000 meters, is it 2,000 meters or 2 nautical miles off the shore of Australia, it becomes international waters. Now, people are allowed to do exercises in international waters. Here's a funny story why I know that. So I did an interview on my podcast last year with a young lady who's a feisty young lady. She works in admin somewhere, but someone's got her back up about these wind farms they want to put in the ocean along the coast of Western Australia. So I interview her, and then I go into my political contacts to find out, who I've got in WA. This girl needs help. And so they speak to her and they help her out. And what they find out is extraordinary, Jason, right? This is as bad as selling the gas and also the coal to China. So what we discovered in our investigations is that the Australian government is essentially proposing that the Australian taxpayer pay for thousands of these massive wind turbines. Some of them have been shelved now. It's a terrible idea, hopefully, because this girl pushed back. And they have these sneaky meetings and they don't tell you when they're on. And they said, oh, nobody opposes at the meeting, but nobody knew the meeting was carrying on. So the Australian taxpayer pays hundreds of millions of dollars to pay for wind turbines to go green so Australia can get to net zero, the big lie, net zero brain cells, more like it, to put all of these what are they called, wind turbines out in the ocean. Now, do you know what these sneaky asshole companies were doing? Because you have to give this money to companies who are going to run these turbines, right? Their map we looked at where they were going to place these turbines were just outside Australian waters in international waters, which means A, there's no security on them. Anyone can come and take them out. It would be an international waters incident. But B, the people of Australia get no profits from the energy generated from the turbines that they paid for. This whole thing is a scam. We give the money to the private company and the private company makes all the money. That's the upshot of it, right?
Yep.
And so, it's just madness what's happening. It is fraud, actually, and fraud is still a crime. Conspiracy is still a crime. Subversion of democracy is still a crime. I don't know what the official term is when you're pilfering government coffers, but that's what these people are doing. And they have no lawful right to do it. That's why they brought in things like the Australia Act of 1986 to subvert your rights to even investigate this kind of thing. It's why they want to, use things like anti-Semitism to bring in hate speech laws and anti-freedom of speech. It's why the Safety Commissioner exists. As I've said before, these crimes are being committed and the people committing the crimes are walking out the door with literal truckloads and boatloads of our money, but they're not being charged with anything. And those of us who spot the crime and put our hand up and go, police, police, robbery, I'm being robbed, we're the ones who are going to jail. They are literally shooting the messenger because they don't want us to notice that they're committing the crimes. So we need systems and methods in place, and I know Rennick is all over this, that this cannot happen. This must be stopped before it happens. We're clearly not protected enough in Australia. We were with the original constitution, which we're going to discuss at length in tomorrow's show. We're not by the Australia Act of 1986, and they're all clearly operating as if that's the constitution, even though it was voted in by nobody, the constitution of nobody. And you've got people like Malcolm Roberts, a sitting senator, lying in interviews saying, oh, the Australia Act is the only constitution voted on by the people and it's wonderful. No, Malcolm, it wasn't. And I hate to keep harping on about it, and it sounds a very boring thing to harp on about, but instead of worrying about the little things like the theft, the treason and the heist and the vaccines and the lockdowns and the climate hoax and all of that, if you bring down that one thing, it's a big umbrella, I believe, that's protecting an awful lot of crime. And I want that crime to stop, because the crime isn't happening against it isn't Australia robbing China or America robbing, South Africa. This is our own bureaucrats and our own governments now doing the bidding of greedy corporations and billionaires, robbing from the people. And they have no lawful right to do that, Jason. They don't.
No, well said. Got a great way to get to the end of the show, Nicola, and good setup for tomorrow's show. Can't wait to get into it. It's Look, I think for a Monday, we have nailed more issues than anyone else. If you find a better news show anywhere, can you tell us what it is? Because we want to tune into it. Nicola, I think we are punching above our weight.
Oh, you're very confident, Jason. I think we have a great niche of listeners, and I know that when they send it out to other people who've never heard it before, they do contact me. I mean, they're contacting me from all over. That we've got people listening in Ukraine and Germany and Greece, and people are contacting me and saying, one contacted me at the end of last week from Norway and said your show's very popular in Norway. I mean, can you believe it, Jason? And I think they're really interested. They're telling me because they see Australia and Canada as like these test zones. I mean, Australia, we're isolated here in the southern hemisphere. We've got water all around us. If you were going to try, or let's say our free trial of communism. We've been in the free trial for 5 years. Yeah, I'm not going to take that free trial, thanks. It's kind of rubbish. And everyone's looking from everywhere else in the world because I think what they're telling themselves, Jason, if they can do it in Australia, they can do it anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Well, what a show. I tell you what, I'm excited. I'm thrilled that we're getting listeners in from all parts of the world. I made the comment on the Charles Ortel interview the other day about some shenanigans coming out with Norwegian prime ministers. So I hope our listeners will be able to get a chance to look up on some of these extended interviews like the one with Charles and like the one with John Cullen, and others are coming up. And I'll share the interviews that I have been invited on as well through the various different platforms. And this is all part of what I believe will be the first step in a consolidation of independent media around the world, because that's the thing, isn't it? If people are listening from other parts, then clearly we've got something to offer, and we need to be able to aggregate that information and put together people who are literally doing the work in their own parts of the world and providing us with the best quality information. What a great show.
Yeah, great show. Great listening to all that. And I feel very sorry for the business you mentioned who owes salary to staff and they've got 85 cents in the bank. That's what these people have done to us. And I think you said that was a childcare centre, and, they're taking care of people's little kiddies when they go to work, and they both have to work because nobody's got any money. So thanks so much for listening to the show. Any ideas you've got for the monetization of our show, or what we should look like moving forward? I think it would be fabulous if this show was absorbed into a larger media company, and I know there's people out there thinking about that. And then perhaps we could be on a platform where, there were other shows and other people who were also speaking truth, because I know there's a lot of them out there. It doesn't just, in the end, I guess, need to be Jason and I, but it will absolutely always be Jason and I on the Daily Australian, the OG, the original. So if you want to see Jason's interview at length with Charles Ortel, go to his X account and scroll down. Jason is at Jason Q Citizen 1. And for my stuff, go to All Bite No Bark 88. I couldn't use my real name for the account. That's why it's All Bite No Bark 88, because I was universally shadow banned. And FYI, I was contacted by Jack Dorsey, who said it wasn't him that deplatformed me. Interesting. Thanks for listening to myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olbourne. We will see you all again tomorrow, where we'll be concentrating on the real Australian Constitution.